Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our August Climate Cafe, Sustainable Energy Systems That Actually Work. I am Dana Freeling, the Chair of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council. I reside in Finland and I am a proud Texas voter. As we are all aware, our climate and environment are gravely under attack by the current administration, not just with the big ugly bill or the dismantling of our government and science infrastructure, but also with a direct assault on our democracy. Um, it's coming from all sides, but we must not relent. As the great Al Gore once said, we cannot solve our climate crisis without solving our democracy crisis. Well, yesterday, Trump announced a direct attack on our voting rights by executive order to eliminate mail-in voting. I'm sure all of you understand the implications of this order, especially for those of us living abroad. I'm going to put a link in the chat and please click that link and it will take you to our Democrats Abroad Stop Trump Attack on Mail Voting on our pages. It will give you some actions that you can take immediately to, perhaps make a difference. We are more powerful in numbers. Thank you for doing that. Now, on to the main content for today's programming, where we will discuss building sustainable energy systems with our esteemed guest speaker, Harry Apostoleris. Harry will explain how energy system planners can ensure clean electric grids supply us with the power that we need when we need it, while also integrating clean energy technologies. Harry Apostoleris is an energy sector professional in Dubai, and he is chair of Democrats Abroad UAE. In his career at the Masdar Institute, the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, and the Electric Power Research Institute, Harry has focused on the design and economics of large-scale clean energy systems. With a great wealth of knowledge and experience and an invaluable member of the Democrats Abroad family, it is with much gratitude that I welcome Harry to the floor. Take it away.
Thank you, Dana. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the kind words, and I hope that I'll live up to people's expectations. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, then. Here we go. I am, as Dana introduced, Harry Apostoleris. I'm chair of Democrats Abroad UAE. I've been in the UAE between Dubai and Abu Dhabi for the last, there we go, good. For the last, 13 years now. I've been around some fairly cool places. There I was for 8 years at the Masdar Institute, which is in Abu Dhabi, which was a research center and graduate university set up to look at the energy sector from the perspective of sustainability. And a lot of people that are in the solar and the electric utility sector in the UAE and the Gulf now came out of this place, although it doesn't completely exist anymore, which is a shame. I worked for the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, which is the state utility company of the Emirate of Dubai for 3 years. I was in their R&D center, and I worked on energy systems modeling and planning. And that is the topic that I'm going to be talking about here today. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this stuff in this context here in Democrats Abroad, because in my current role, I work for a company that is really quite explicitly and conscientiously non-political, even though the topics that we work on are perhaps, unfortunately, very, very political, and maybe in the United States more than in other places. And we'll just do what we can today to get around some of those topics and hopefully have an interesting conversation. So the first thing that I want to do is just give a picture, a schematic in everybody's mind of what do we mean when we talk about the energy system. And it's really the process of how electricity gets to you, the end user, the customer. And again, I don't know what anyone's background here is. Some of the things that I talk about here may be familiar. Some of the things may be new. Um, I'm on the inside of the industry, so I sometimes don't entirely know what people on the outside know or don't know. But if you feel I'm losing you, going too fast, said something that you haven't heard before, just stop me and we'll go back. And Dana, if you can just, if people say anything in the chat or something or want to talk, if I miss them, just let me know, break in, cut me off at any time so that I can address things that people want to know. Uh, so, when we talk about the energy system, what are we talking about? Normally, the electric utility sector, we divide it into sort of three operations, four if you count the customer yourself. We have the generation, which is where you're actually producing the electricity. It's the power plants, it's the solar farms, wind farms, etc., where the electricity is actually being generated. Transmission refers to carrying the electricity over long distances. So it's the high voltage lines that you'll see going over the highway, when you're driving between towns or whatever it is. And then the part that we're sort of familiar with in our communities, the utility poles or the underground lines. Those are the lower voltage distribution lines, which are taking from the big transmission lines out to all the smaller centers where you, the customers, are, and it can be us people in our houses, it can be businesses, office buildings, it can be industries. Uh, that's all on what we call the end use or the consumer side of the electric sector. Uh, with that out of the way, we do a little overview. Maybe this is more familiar to people. How do we actually produce the electricity? Of course, we all know our different sources, our renewable sources, wait, let me activate the little pen thing. Have you got my laser pointer now? Okay, you've got my laser
Yes.
pointer now. Yeah, you've got your renewable sources, you've got your non-renewable sources, and I wanted to just highlight here some of the different ways, because a lot of these terms sometimes get conflated with each other. And I just wanted to run through quickly some of the different ways that we categorize energy sources or energy technologies. We talk a lot about renewables versus non-renewables, and it's sometimes associated with clean energy. Really, what we just mean by renewables is it's coming from a source in the environment that will continue to renew itself, typically something that traces its energy back ultimately to the sun. So if you're looking at things that depend on winds or the water cycle, that traces ultimately back from the sun, which is the ultimate source of energy for our renewables. And for our non-renewables, by the way, it's just that the oil and gas and coal were created so slowly over so many years that they're functionally non-renewable. We're consuming them as fuel a lot faster than they were created, by the process of living things decaying over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So that's one of the categories that we look at. We also very saliently look at, clean energy. So we're looking at high carbon or low carbon technologies. This, as you might imagine, lines up fairly nicely with the renewable versus non-renewable, considering that most of our non-renewable sources are fossil fuels. Sort of the middle ground one here is nuclear, which is a carbon-free energy technology because we're not doing combustion. Technically, it's a non-renewable source because you use up uranium and then it's spent. But also, there's kind of so much uranium in the ground, or rather, the nuclear energy generation uses the uranium so slowly that it's something that could be there as a long-term resource, but it's not a renewable. resource. And then if we want to have discussions over whether it's clean or not, we can have those discussions as well. From the perspective of planning the energy system, uh, these other two terms that might not be as out in the public sort of conversation are really important. One is the idea of flexible versus inflexible resources. That is, can you turn them on and off, turn them up and down as you need them based on what the demand for energy is at a given time? And the other one related is the idea of variable power plus firm power. And firm power typically refers to something that's always there, whether it's generating power or not at the moment, it's there if you need it. Variable is a source like wind or solar that depends on some outside energy source that basically does what it wants. So if you talk about variable, we often say variable renewable energy to refer to solar or wind, because they vary based on what the sun and the wind are doing at your particular location at a particular time. They're not necessarily always there when we need them. And contrary to what some very silly political people like to say and think is a gotcha, energy system planners actually know this and account for it in their planning of energy systems. So let's do a little walk through what goes into planning an energy system. And I'm going to draw actually on a study that I did in my previous job when I was working in R&D for the power company. And I was doing studies on the energy transition for them, pathways for them to change over their system from one that's being driven mainly by natural gas to one that's being driven mainly by solar energy. And we'll see some of the steps along that process here. So, what is the first and overarching consideration when you're designing an electric system? The first and overarching consideration is, what do your customers need? What is your total demand for energy? When is it needed? At what times will the demand be high? At what times will it be low? And critically, what's the maximum amount of power that you're ever going to have to deliver at a certain time? These down here are in two different ways a representation of the yearly energy demand that we see where I am. This is showing the demand at every hour, and it's a little bumpy. The blue and the orange colors, don't worry about those. That's from something we did in our study where we separated the demand that comes from air conditioning out from the rest of the demand. Yes?
Hey.
What?
We good? All right, I'll say we're good. So you can just look at this top line here and say a critical, wait a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because
Yes.
my computer froze and I didn't know if it froze for everybody. So you can see about over here, this is where you get what we call peak demand, and that's when you're going to have to deliver the most power that you're ever going to have to give into your system. So this is one a really important number that the system planner needs to know, because you have to build your power plants, your solar farms, your wind farms, your power lines, your transmission and distribution lines, so that they can supply at least this expected peak of your demand, and typically then some on top, because you don't know what's going to happen. You want to leave some room for demand to potentially grow in the future. You also want to have contingencies in place for if you lose some part of your generating or transmitting assets in your system. And we'll look at some of those ways that an energy system can go wrong later in this presentation. Here I'm going to step you through a modeled operation of an energy system that's being used to inform how we design it in a study that I did. This is a study. It was published in a paper, but it's based very heavily on the actual energy system that exists in the country where I'm living now. And hopefully this can give some illustration of how different sources of energy, different resources play together in order to meet the demand for electricity in an energy system that relies on multiple sources. What we're seeing here is the modeled operation over 8 days of an energy system that's very closely modeled again on the one that exists in the United Arab Emirates. The black line here is the energy demand. This is what the customers are asking for at any given time through the operations at their offices, their factories, through what you're turning on at your house. This is the electricity that's being drawn by all the things that the customers are doing through the system. What's filled in down here is the way that the different technologies or power plants or energy resources are contributing to meet that demand. And it provides a nice little illustration of how different types of energy generation systems actually work as part of the system. I don't know why. Have we got a legend here? We don't. I lost the legend. So it's nice. The system that actually exists now is pretty much three components: nuclear power, gas power plants, and solar. And we see how the three of these operate differently. Down on the bottom here, we've got the nuclear. Remember, we talked about flexible, inflexible, firm, or variable sources. Nuclear is a firm, inflexible resource. Nuclear power plants, if you've ever seen them, big behemoths, and you've got the fuel rods that go in. The nuclear chain reaction runs inside of them, creates a lot of heat. That heat creates steam, goes into a steam turbine, and it goes. For both technical and economic reasons, these nuclear power plants are basically never turned down. They run at full power all the time for a year or more until they're shut down for maintenance to change the fuel rods. Then you power them back up and they run at full power. You've always got the thing is always there for you, and it's always basically giving you all the power that it can give you. Hence, a firm and inflexible. We sometimes call this a base load power generator. What's up here? This is our gas turbine power plants. These are running on natural gas, and you see immediately these things are turning themselves up and down based on what the total load is, a total demand for electricity is that they have to meet. So, by the way, you see this in an old system, say it was just this nuclear and this gas, you'd have the gas going up during the day and down at night. Up during the day, down at night, up during the day, down at night. But we've added a third part to the system, which is our solar energy. Solar, of course, comes up during the day and it's not there at night. So we've seen this funny little change in how these gas power plants operate, which is they actually go down during the day when there's more solar, and they come up at night when the solar isn't there. And so that's sort of an illustration of our three main categories of generator, which we call them base load, and the nuclear is a good example of a base load plant. The firm flexible generator, the gas turbine is the best of these, and we also call them load following plants because they turn themselves up and down to follow the load, which is another word we use for the demand for electricity. And then the variable renewables with solar. When they're there, they're there. When they're not there, something else has to come in to compensate. I want to draw your attention to this little number here because this was part of an energy system cost study that we did. And this here was the modeled cost of generating electricity. Now, this isn't the number that you'd see on your electric bill, because the number you see on your electric bill involves all the other infrastructure, the transmission, the distribution lines. It has to pay for the whole system, not just the generation of electricity. But looking just at the generation system and comparing it across the different scenarios we're going to see, we saw this number here, about 5.2. These are rough numbers, cents per kilowatt hour, and just keep an eye on that number because we're going to see it in the other ones, because we did a couple of other scenarios that we studied that illustrate something interesting about what is possible for renewable energy sources in our energy system from an economic perspective. We did another study, which is that we essentially took the same demand. You see the lines were a little bit different shape here. We can talk about that later if anyone's interested. But we gave it the same overall electricity demand and said, hey, big optimization program, what is the lowest cost configuration of the energy system? Be clear, we didn't give it any other restrictions. We didn't say cut carbon. We didn't say anything. We said give us the lowest cost energy system. Given that we've already got this much solar, this much nuclear, this much gas, what are you going to add into the system to make it lower cost? What did the optimization program do to give it the lowest possible cost of the energy system? It added a bunch more solar because, especially out where I am, solar energy is the cheapest energy that you can get, and it has been for several years. And that relates to they're importing the solar panels and the other systems cheaply. It relates to there being a lot of sun, so each solar panel generates a lot of energy over its life. And there are other factors as well if people are interested in those. But the really interesting thing that I wanted to point out is under these conditions that we've got here, you didn't have to tell the model to do anything related to emissions, anything related to any social good, except give us the cheapest electricity generation that you can. And it built us a whole bunch more solar and dropped the cost of generating electricity by about 5%. One more thing. We did a study looking out into the future, and that involved changing some of the costs of the different technologies we'd need in a way that I'm going to show you in the next slide. We did the exact same thing, said build us the cheapest possible energy system for 2050 based on what we think the costs of the different types of technology are going to be. What did it do for us? Built us a whole lot more solar, much more than the energy demand is at any time during the day, and stored it in batteries and discharged the batteries overnight. And you see actually very, very little gas being used. The gas plants are still there. They're there to back up the system, but they're being used very, very little. So the emissions are very, very low from the system. And the cost goes down even more. Now, I said there was an assumption in this. First off, let me stop talking stream of consciousness and let people jump in and ask me anything that you want to know or talk about before I move on to why this happened, why it got even cheaper when we put even more solar in the
Okay,
future.
shall we have folks put star hand up in the chat if they have an immediate question, if they want to interject, or do you want to continue? How would
I can absolutely continue. There's a few more slides. At least it gets the explanation of this, and then we can start talking about how things can go wrong in the energy system.
I've got a question, which is
Yes.
just I see that this optimized system depends a lot on battery storage, energy storage, and I'm just wondering what the state of the art is in terms of developing energy storage.
Energy storage is doing ridiculous things over the last 4 years, over the last few years, and just to tease, what we can talk about later, like it's all in China. It's all in China. Yes, there are political implications to this, which I'd love to talk about. Because of electric cars, the production of batteries, particular types of lithium ion batteries, lithium iron phosphate technology, it's what goes in all the electric cars now. So the production of these batteries just exploded, mainly in China. Exploded is a bad word to use when it comes to batteries. Anyway, we'll get into that later too. But it got really big. It got really big. Um, and one of the things that I'll actually get to right on the next slide is when mass-produced goods get big and a lot of them get made, they tend to get cheap. Um, and so battery technology in terms of mass production is really advancing very rapidly, mainly in China, and the costs are coming down faster even than they came down for solar panels, which was already ridiculous and shocked the world uh, when it happened. Uh, so these are things. This is from a study that I did like 3 years ago, and I think the numbers are probably already out of date. Like I would probably the estimate for the cost of batteries that I used to get this to do this modeling study, probably those costs are conservative now for 2050. Probably we would expect them to get even lower because things have just changed uh, so fast. Um, if I can, I'd like to jump to the next slide because it directly
Okay.
addresses
Joanne did have a question
this.
for you.
Well, then hold that thought, and I'll answer the next. Go to the next question.
Is it me?
Yes, I think.
Hi, Harry. Thanks for doing this. And
No
thanks, Dana, for organizing, or whoever organized it.
It was
I
Dana.
have a question about the environmental impact and costs of the of making the solar panels,
Yeah.
and then dismantling them if they're no longer viable.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of studies, mostly a while ago, um, on this in terms of energy, which is like sort of a proxy for emissions. We're assuming that these things are made in China, they're being made with coal power. That may not always be the case now, since they've installed a huge amount of solar there, as well. But in terms of how long it takes the solar panel to generate the amount of energy that was used to create it, most numbers give us around 1 year, sometimes a little bit less. It depends also on where you put it. If you put it in a sunny area, it will be less because it gets more sun, it puts out more electricity. So from that perspective, which is a way of looking at kind of how long does it take to make up for the emissions that went in to creating it? Um, give or take about 1 year, if you assume that the solar panel operates and it replaces some energy that would be produced by burning a fossil fuel. So that is kind of okay. The bigger question about like manufacturing processes and end of life stuff has two answers. One of them kind of a crappy answer, but it sort of is the way it is. Every manufactured product has environmental, negative side effects. So that gets to like a bit of a bigger, that gets to a bigger issue. In that way, it's even beyond solar panels. Um, as far as what do you do at the end of the solar panels life? Recycling, recycling, recycling. Technically, the recycling of solar panels is completely possible. There just hasn't been a market for it because the industry is still new. Solar panels last for 30 years. So there's not enough solar panels that are dead out there to support a big solar panel recycling industry. When we get to that point, which is actually coming soon, that's one of the things you'd say it will be important to have policies to promote and make it, favorable to recycle the solar panels into new products or new solar panels rather than dump them in a landfill and manufacture new ones.
I know you were going to change your slide, but Naomi has her hand up for a question.
That's fine.
Thanks very much, Harry. So in all the things you've considered for solar, it seems to focus on panels. But if you look at some of the research that's being done on product variables, such as MIT and this application of stick-on to existing roof material, where it's not a panel. I
Or
mean,
windows.
isn't that changing the dialogue again in how functional solar could become beyond the panel issue?
Yeah. So it is and it isn't, and I followed this partially. Um, the solar roofing, that's an interesting one because back 4 or 5 years ago, roofing companies were actually getting into solar and they were making solar shingles. Uh, those, to what extent they've caught on, I'm not sure. I've had some conversations uh, about this with people that basically go along the lines of as expensive as a roof is to get done, the solar shingles actually are quite expensive relative to the same electric capacity of solar panel. So people who would be going for solar shingles, by and large, seem to just be going for, I'm going to keep my roof and put solar panels
No,
over it. It seemed like there was a market issue.
This research is not at all replacing the shingles. It is an application that adheres to the existing shingle that is in
Yeah.
fact solar capable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in addition to that, there's encouraging communities to install an array that can that the entire community
Yeah.
can tap into using existing infrastructure.
Yeah. This is actually something that's important to keep in mind. The last thing, because you're going to the idea of community solar. A lot of us think of solar panels as something that goes on the roof, and actually, because of where I work, you know, am guilty of thinking the exact opposite. Uh, where I am, basically the utility didn't want the trouble of everyone having solar panels on their roof. They said, we're going to go out in the desert and build giant solar parks. Let me actually run all the way back. Down here, this bottom corner. This is like a corner of the solar park that my previous office was located at. Like it's gigawatts. It's a nuclear power plant's worth in terms of how much electricity it can produce of solar panels covering miles and miles of desert. Uh, so to your point, uh, solar can be anything from one roof of a house to miles and miles of desert acting like a power plant. And to me personally, community solar is a super interesting and positive way that we can actually get solar energy uh, introduced. And especially as we get into, oh, are you going to have storage? Oh, are you going to charge electric cars off of it? And things like this sometimes can solve some of your problems by having it in a centralized place, as opposed to everyone sort of being every man for himself and having it at their home. That's my feeling. I like community solar. All right, do we have more? Good. Should we move on?
Move on.
All right, sounds good. Where are we at on time? Okay, 45. We're good.
We're good.
All right. So I wanted to, and I think we've touched on it a little bit already, uh, go into this idea of why do we just put a bunch of batteries into our energy system and it got cheaper? And it's because we're looking into the future and we're making some assumptions. So I hope these figures came out all right. But if we look down here, we're looking at the cost, the average cost around the world of installing a solar farm and installing a wind farm, of building a wind farm, of building a solar farm. And if you see, this goes back to 2010. And if you look just how dramatically over the last 10, 15 years, the cost of particularly building solar farms has come down, and to some extent, wind farms as well. And that is largely due to the dramatic reduction in the price of solar panels. And it comes from this idea that whenever you have a product that's mass produced that I referred to originally, it has something that gets called in industrials, be it called learning behavior, or there's a learning curve. And there's a mathematical relation that you can quantify for different industries that says, as I produce more units of a mass-produced good, the cost of producing the next unit will fall by a certain amount. So solar panels are coming out, millions and millions and millions of solar panels coming off of these manufacturing lines, mostly in China, every year. And the more comes out, the more the process gets optimized, the more the workforce gets trained, the more you're able to have bigger and bigger factories that reduce their costs. And the more it just becomes a known process that can be automated and that can be done just like that. And so we've seen this situation where 10 years ago, a solar farm would cost 2 or 3 times more than a normal power plant to build. And now it costs like half as much as a normal power plant to build. And that's what's behind this total changeover of the whole conversation that's gone away from how do we get renewables into how do we force the utility companies, the power companies, to allow more solar, allow more renewables into their system for an emissions purpose. It's how can the power companies of their own will get more and more solar energy into their system because it's cheaper and it reduces the cost. And the same thing, by the way, is happening right now with batteries, and that's because of, one, the electric car industry, two, some policies that were put in place in China for their domestic solar installations that basically forced solar installers to install batteries along with their solar panels, and that created a huge demand inside of China for, they call them stationary storage systems, so batteries in a cabinet that you can put in a community or next to a solar farm that will charge from whatever source is available and then discharge that energy into the power grid when it is needed. And we're seeing the exact same learning behavior for battery systems that we're seeing for solar panels, and that is changing right now because I work with utility companies in my current role around the region, and they're all changing the way they think about batteries because suddenly they're seeing they can install them much more cheaply than they could in the past. We have some outliers, by the way, in this trend. So here's your global trend, right? Here's the last few years. Here's what it's costing to put up solar. And this is, I think, this is a levelized cost of electricity. So it's a typical price of electricity that you'd pay for energy coming out of a solar park, because that depends not just on the cost of putting it up, but also on how much electricity it produces. That'll be different in different parts of the world. But critically, we're looking at globally, it's down here. China's doing very well because they have both very low costs of the solar panels and the systems themselves. They're manufacturing it all in-house. They don't have to ship it outside. And they have a lot of regions, which is where they're installing most of their solar, where they can produce a lot of electricity. EU, not so great. Part of this is about the solar resource. Partially it's about higher costs, partially it's about large parts of Europe don't have a great solar resource, but do have policies that have incentivized people to install solar. So you have a lot of solar parks in Germany and other places that are just not producing as much as a solar park in the south of Spain or in Africa or in the Middle East or in certain Chinese territories would. And then you have the United States. And we have Texas, we have the Southwest, we have some of the greatest solar resource locations in the world that have, for quite some time, been getting developed. And people putting solar on their houses, and utility companies have been making contracts with solar farm operators, big solar farm operators, to buy electricity from them. They'll build a solar farm in the desert, and the utility company buys electricity from them. And yet our costs are very high. And there's a figure from a study that I didn't include here, but it showed that actually the cost of a solar panel in the United States domestic market is 2 or 3 times higher than it is in the global market. And the market for solar panels and these other technologies is global. What's different in the United States? We have both basically no domestic manufacturing of these technologies. Factories that we have are small, much smaller than what we need in order to actually deploy solar energy, build solar energy at the scale that we want. And increasingly, we have trade barriers with most of the world now, and particularly with the places where these technologies are being manufactured, where the solar panels and the other systems are being made, which is, again, mainly China. And we can have a discussion about the different aspects and dynamics of that, because I understand this from multiple different perspectives, but it is something that, to me, really jumps out at you when you look at the situation of clean energy in the United States versus other parts of the world, is how we're kind of an outlier on the bad side, and we don't have to be. This is just a general sort of wrap up of what it means to plan an energy system that's in transition. We used to have this idea of the customers demand energy, and you just build some resources, some power plants, and you use those power plants to respond to the customer's demand. Now that we want to add in renewables, we still have to meet the customer's demand, but we have a step in between because the customers want electricity this much at this time. The wind and the sun give us electricity, but it's that much at that time. And then the building of the energy system has to be, how do we fill in that gap between what nature is providing and what our customers are demanding? And hopefully some of the studies that I showed you on the previous slides give some idea of the ways that energy system planners are able to do that. We haven't at all even gone into the idea of demand side management, which is how can we incentivize the customers to change their behaviors so that their requirement for electricity better matches with what's being provided by our renewable resources. But let's save that for later. What I want to get into is things that can go wrong in the energy system, things that make the news, because there's a whole lot of chatter that goes on about these events. And sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's wrong, and almost always it needs more context and more understanding of how energy systems are actually set up and operated.
Iceageddon.
Iceageddon, yes. In 2021, Texas suffered Iceageddon, which had all sorts of ill effects. One of those being blackouts in many, many places because there wasn't enough electricity going into the Texas power grid. tell me, Dana, was there a statewide blackout at any point, or were there
So
localized
in
blackouts?
February of 2021,
Yeah,
late January or February of 2021, there was a blackout for a week when it was minus 18 degrees centigrade.
yep,
So
yep,
people like my 90-year-old mother were left without
yep,
electricity or running water for
yep,
a week.
yep,
It was and the official entities that be that Abbott was blaming wind energy and the
yep,
renewables, which
yep. And this is stupid. And hopefully some of the things that we've talked about up to now give you some idea of why. Um, First off, we were talking about planning energy systems. What's the first rule of planning an energy system? You have to meet the demand. Energy system planners know that wind energy and solar energy are dependent on the weather. If your planners know what they're doing, they're going to build backups into the system. They're going to have other resources that can come online and can deliver the energy that's needed uh, when the wind and the solar are not there, which we know always, sometimes they're not. Uh, in the case of Texas, they have a lot of power plants that run on natural gas. What they didn't have, as far as I understand what occurred, is weatherization on those power plants and on the infrastructure that fed fuel into them. So turbines within the power plants froze up. The gas lines delivering fuel to the power plants froze up. And enough of their power plants had to go offline because they literally couldn't spin or get fuel into them, that there was not enough energy being generated in order to meet the requirements of the customers. And because of this, there were blackouts at the time when you least want a blackout, which is when it is very, very cold in a place where people are not used to it being very, very cold and need energy to keep their houses warm, and in some cases, to keep themselves alive. By the way, one of the reasons why Texas both could get away with not maintaining and weatherizing uh, its power plants and its gas grid, and wasn't able to bring in electricity from other states, is because Texas has been, for a very long time, disconnected from the rest of the United States so that they don't have to be regulated by the Department of Energy.
the Lone Star State, all
So,
along with though producing the largest amount of wind energy in the country,
yep,
second in solar. So
yep. And that's what I mean when I say other things get in the way. The greatest and by the way, like, we've already gotten there. Already, this resource has been developed for economic reasons, nothing else. You've got the resource, you can get the technology in. By the way, all developers in the United States, anyone who installs wind or solar, whether it's you on your house or a big utility company putting up a giant solar park or a wind farm, has been eligible in the past for an investment tax credit. So they can get a tax credit up to 30% the value of what they've put in, and that's made it very favorable. Of course, that is now, I don't know exactly what the status is, but it certainly seems to be on the way out, that tax credit, due to the new push for, I believe it's called, energy dominance. This is something that pisses me off. But enough of that. Um, there is another more recent and a little more nuanced event that I'd like to get into, which is what happened in Spain earlier this year, where basically all of Spain and Portugal blacked out for a whole day.
mm,
Um, this was a more complicated event. This was not a straightforward shortage of energy. Uh, this was more related to how the transmission system uh, is operating. and what was happening to the AC power signals in the transmission lines at various points along the system that essentially caused a whole lot of first power plants and solar parks, and then a whole lot of customers to be automatically disconnected from the grid, because essentially the signal in the lines was getting very funny. This is something that, again, we don't really have a final judgment on. A lot of people are rushing to say this was because of the solar and wind. A lot of people are rushing to say that it had nothing to do with the solar and wind, and we can't actually make either of those claims. What we can say is that basically whatever is discovered out of this, there are ways to deal with it. Okay, so how do I put this? The way that this is being described, the most likely explanation for what happened in Spain, it's being described by power system planners as a problem with a lack of inertia. Basically, that a whole bunch of systems, because in the old way, you have power plants that are spinning, and then you have an AC current that's going and is basically set by these big spinning pieces of machinery. And I'm sorry to get into electrical engineering, which is actually something I'm terrible at here. But when you have solar parks or wind parks on the grid, they're outputting from themselves DC power, and you put it through an inverter, which turns it into an AC signal. But that AC signal has to match up with the oscillation frequency of the power in the rest of the grid. And when you have a whole lot of these systems that work through inverters rather than through big spinning machinery, those different AC signals, different waves at different parts of the system can get out of sync and can cause these automatic trips that can ultimately crash the system. There are technologies that can address this. They call them grid forming systems that can basically get a whole bunch of solar and wind parks to play nicely together and create a consistent signal in the power grid, similar to what a big power plant with a rotating turbine would do. That's as deep as I'm going to go into this, just to say there are technical solutions to this. There was another problem in Spain, which is how long it took them to get the grid back up, because they didn't lose any physical components. It was just everyone got disconnected because the power in the lines got wonky, and they had to restart it from a dead state. In order to restart your power plants, they need power. If the whole grid's dead, you can't get the power to the plants to get them started back up again. And it seems like all of the power plants on the Spanish grid that had systems like generators that could have been used to supply this power and get everything started up again, they had all been taken offline for maintenance. And they had like one hydroelectric dam that they were able to use for this, and it took them a few tries to get things started up again. So this is now in the weeds. But if you hear people start talking about black start systems, and that's what they mean. It's how do you get the grid back up once it's crashed due to some event like this. And this is really, really important for having a reliable system. Obviously, you want to avoid a nationwide blackout if you can, but these things are really important for if you do have a nationwide blackout, how do you get things running again when all of your generating systems are dead and there's no electricity in the lines at all? There are real challenges to integrating renewables, and I'm not here to dismiss those. And we all should be aware that not every statement of these challenges is inherently an attack on renewables themselves. But there are solutions. There are solutions that exist typically and just need to be implemented. And people who try to claim that this is a reason why we shouldn't use renewables at all are willfully ignoring these solutions because they have some other agenda. Finally, whoa, do I have time to talk about AI? Yeah, I'll only take a couple of minutes to talk about AI. The big thing on the horizon, which is already having an effect, data centers. And already data centers were becoming a big draw of electricity. But now with this AI push, there are more and more data centers coming on, and they're demanding more and more electricity. And this is not the forum where I'll say one way or another what I think about AI, but I will sort of clear-headedly say, here are some of the observed impacts that are coming from the push for AI. And we know that these are related to AI because the effects are being concentrated in places where there are lots of AI data centers being built. One is this idea of a power quality. We talked about the AC power going in the lines, and then different things can get out of sync with each other, and the signal gets wonky. This is what a wonky signal looks like. It's interference between two signals that are out of sync with each other. You may have experienced these things, these power quality issues, as brownouts, where essentially the power coming out of your outlet is either reduced through the interference between different AC signals, or it becomes incompatible with your appliances, and they don't work or they don't work as well. And these, there was a big story published in Bloomberg, I think. I think it's from Bloomberg, documenting the increasing rate of power quality issues occurring around the United States, and them being particularly concentrated where there are AI data centers coming online. It's also impacting prices for customers because there is a huge amount of electricity that's required by these data centers to keep them running. And we're seeing across the entire country normal retail customer electricity prices going up, in some more than others, but in most of the country, they're going up. And this is pretty much openly being attributed to there is so much new demand from these data centers coming on, and we've got to meet it. We're out to dominate the AI future. That, well, there's just a temporary supply and demand situation where there's more demand than supply, and your prices for electricity are going to go up as a consequence of that. Expect these problems to get worse before they get better. What would I want people to take away from this as a wrap up? First is that don't listen to what people say. I'm working in an oil country, okay? The whole business over here is selling oil, and in some countries, natural gas to the rest of the world. These places where I am have understood that generating electricity more cheaply for their people is only a good thing. And by the way, it frees up more of their own oil and gas that they can export to other countries and make more money off of it. The oil and gas industry is structured differently in these countries. They have national oil companies here. Of course, in the United States, we do not, and the incentives are different. I could say something about the difference in policies that you get when the government owns the oil industry as opposed to when the oil industry owns the government, but we can save that.
Good way of putting it.
Anyway, building a clean energy that actually works requires appropriate planning and design for both generating and for moving and for using the energy. We have unique barriers in the United States that are preventing us from fully realizing the potential that renewable energy, especially solar and batteries, can give to us in terms of having not just cleaner, but actually cheaper and in some cases more reliable energy systems. Anytime you see a cost-cutting culture that says we don't have to invest in this, we can cut corners on that, danger, danger, danger. You're going to encounter a 1 in 100 years event, which seems to be happening about every year now to somebody in the United States that will stress your system beyond what you expected it to, and you will be the next Texas. Don't cut corners on planning, and probably don't ban your public agencies from talking about climate change, because you might be surprised when the climate actually changes and you encounter conditions that are not within the design parameters of your system, and you become the next Texas. And look out for the freeloaders. Customers, I won't say, I'm not saying AI data centers. I'm saying freeloading customers in general who don't pay the full cost of meeting their demand in terms of the transmission, the distribution, the backup systems, but somehow are able to get this electricity at wholesale prices because they're very important for one reason or another. They ruin the system for everybody. That's what I've got to say
Okay, we have
today.
a bunch
What
of
have you got to
questions.
say to me?
We have a bunch of questions waiting. So
I bet we do.
I'm going to move to Bahare. I know she had a question, and if we have time, I can ask my question afterward because we're running pretty late. Bahare?
Yeah, Harry, wonderful. I always enjoy hearing your perspective. I'm also in a very fossil fuel oriented country as well, as you know. Can you just speak really quickly on sort of new other forms of energy for as part of the energy transition? We talked a lot about solar, but where else can we go from here? I mean, there's some countries that are looking at hydrogen. Obviously, nuclear is always going to be a part of the discussion. What are your thoughts on that really quickly?
Yeah, it depends on what the resources are where you are. So I work in the Gulf. I work in Dubai. There's a lot of sun here, not a lot of wind. Other parts of, say, the Middle East region have a lot of wind. Saudi Arabia, they're putting a lot of wind as well as a lot of solar in different places because they have wind resources in one place, solar resources in another place. Nuclear, yes, again, not renewable, but a carbon-free or low-carbon technology. You see that a lot in places, oftentimes where they have a weak renewable resource or land restrictions. East Asia, of course, Japan famously went out of nuclear because of the tsunami and the horrible things that happened there. Even they're thinking about going back in because they have so few other options. The question about hydrogen is funny because we don't really have sources of hydrogen. By and large, we produce hydrogen. You can produce it from natural gas. Sometimes they've claimed they can put carbon capture on this and catch the carbon dioxide that comes out. Everything that I've seen of actual practical implementations of this, they have a very low rate of capture, meaning most of the carbon dioxide ends up in the air anyway. The other way is you produce it from water using electricity. That takes a lot of electricity, and you don't get more energy out when you burn the hydrogen than you put in to split the water. You're just turning it from water to hydrogen and back into water again. It can potentially be a way to ship energy from places that have a lot of solar and wind and can produce hydrogen to places that don't and can consume it. In Japan, South Korea, and other places, they're looking at this very heavily, but hydrogen's hard to ship. You often have to process it into a different chemical in order to put it on a ship and send it. And someone here mentioned geothermal. Yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff in geothermal, and it depends on what your resources are. Do you have access to good hot geothermal wells?
Had a question, had her hand up for a
Yes.
question. I'd like to give her the floor to
Yes.
ask, unless it was geothermal.
No, I actually had two. That was a second question. But the theory behind the deep geothermal being something that could be accessible all over the globe if you can go deep enough into the
Yep. You get close enough to the mantle, it's hot. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a little bit less of a mature technology. As in it's not something that you could deploy, you could build it right now. But I know I've not been deeply involved with it, but yeah, there's people who are working on that and trying to make it stack
I
up
heard that that's
technically and
actually
cost-wise.
one niche where, believe it or not, the big bad bill actually continues to support.
Yeah.
You can still get a tax credit if you're working on that technology.
What I've observed is that things that could apply oil and gas industry knowledge or infrastructure are favored.
Right.
But anything that would compete with them is being knocked out.
Yeah, that makes sense. My question was just when you talked about solar panels being 2 to 3 times the cost of the global average. I was just wondering where that data point comes from with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act. Is that pre, during, post?
It's from, I think it ran to like 2023. So that's a funny thing with talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. Depending on where you look, some parts of the Inflation Reduction Act basically were never implemented. They never got through the process before the current guy came in
Right.
and killed it all. So there's a whole other discussion, almost, I don't want to say it, almost an abundance tinted discussion to have about did all the processes work as quickly as they should have to get this bill in, because the policy was incredible. When that bill was passed, I was out in Dubai at trade shows, and the guys in Hydrogen said, everyone is going to the United States. But the implementation was slow, and that energy dissipated, and the benefits were not seen by election time.
Incentives for behavioral change
Yeah.
this was actually my question with the IRA. You had so much investment and tax incentives for development of technologies and for utilization, the uptick of technologies, the 40-40 for for justice communities, 40% going to those. Money was actually taken and put into bank accounts and recalled, taken back by the Trump administration. It was my question, have you been following just how much they've been able to roll back? I mean, there were 900 factories that were created for in red states for batteries and renewable technologies.
I haven't done an accounting of to what extent that's coming back. They of course believe they can remove the carrot and use only the stick. Say, we won't give you anything. We'll just put tariffs on you unless you come here. They believe that's going to work for the things they want it to work for. Maybe they just don't want the solar, the batteries and stuff at all. Because again, it competes with the guys who he said, give me $1 billion for my campaign and you can do whatever you want. Remember that? Yeah, the details of that, I don't know. Again, some of it is policy, some of it is also like corporate culture stuff. A Chinese company or East Asian company in general comes in here. They expect something. American engineers expect something. Sometimes they don't meet and and things get messed up there. But the policy is a mess. The policy is a disaster. And the stuff that did get implemented under IRA is very much in doubt now, where some of it is completely gone. And I blame that very significantly for what I expect to see, which is kind of a drop off in the good energy being built, because that's where the economics are pointing.
It was really disheartening to hear an interview with the senator from Alaska recently, just after now the Putin-Trump summit there, talking about how they're freed now, how they had been unable to utilize their resources, and now they're freed to all the so happy.
Yeah, this is what I would put. Well, we had all sorts of discussion, all sorts of conversation in the chat. Okay, we're good. I guess I've more. Okay, yeah, I guess we've more or less gone through the questions. But yeah, the one thing what I would think of as a framing is from what I see of what this supposed new energy policy is coming. Because this is one of the areas where the Trump administration is not actually stupid. They know what they're doing. They just have oil and gas people and old school electric sector people who basically think renewables are annoying and they don't want to deal with them writing policy. He says this crap about energy dominance a lot, right? One of the things I wanted to highlight by putting up the cost comparisons between us and China and other parts of the world for renewable energies, which are the growing part of the energy sector, is that in some ways, a person could argue that Trump is doing the natural thing, which is he's leaning into America's strength, which is oil and gas, right? The problem is China's leaning into their strength, which is renewable energy systems and storage. And one of these is growing and one of these is shrinking. And every advance that solar, wind, and storage make, it removes a part of the market for the so-called American side of the energy business, which is the oil and gas. And I guess he even wants to bring back coal now. And thanks to AI, he may be getting his way because they just want power from wherever they can get it. The trajectory globally, this can be a positive thing for us. This can be a positive thing for us to say, I see the momentum globally very much as being on the side of the renewables. Does that mean rapid decarbonization? Not necessarily, because we always find new ways to spend. It almost feels like a law of physics.
It's an
that as soon as
add-on,
we
energy
find,
add-on.
exactly, this is
The more we add,
that
the more
concept.
demand there is.
Now, some countries have reduced their emissions significantly by moving to less carbon-intensive forms. Most of the wealthy countries have been reducing their carbon emissions over the last 10 years or so. That may turn around, especially US was kind of flat. And now we may go up again because of the AI thing.
Okay, Harry, Chris has a question for you.
Yeah.
Would you like to ask,
Yeah.
Harry? Or do you
Yeah.
read? Yeah.
Ask away. Oh, is this one? Oh, okay, yeah.
Considering that France utilizes 75% of its energy production from nuclear power, and the problem
Yeah. Okay, I've got it. Yeah, the problem of finding suitable safe repository
radioactive
sites.
waste. How do you see the future of nuclear energy?
Yeah.
Look to Finland. That's all I have to say. And
Yeah.
you probably haven't followed it, but I will let you respond anyway.
Yeah. Well, my first part of the response is one, I'm not a nuclear engineer. So it is all a little bit outside. From my high level perspective, I personally am okay with letting the nuclear go on for now, focus on getting the fossil fuels out of the system because the dispersed gaseous planet destroying waste that comes out of fossil fuel burning power plants is having a far more global destructive effect than essentially solid waste that is fairly small in its volume, that is confined. I'm not a kick the can down the road, or I am a do today what saves your ass today kind of guy. Once we get gas and oil and coal out of our energy system, then the issue of radioactive waste will rise to the top of my priority list. For the time being, it's not so much. France, I know, does the breeder reactors and the reprocessing, and that's one possible avenue. And I don't know anything about Finland. So,
Can I
Dana,
add
what
to
are they
that?
doing in Finland?
Can I add to that,
Yeah.
Harry?
Yeah.
As I totally agree that nuclear needs to be a bridge technology and to eliminate fossil fuel emissions. And in Finland, it's really saved us, particularly when we were cut off from Russian gas. But we have really sixth generation, much more advanced nuclear facilities, and we are a country of granite and lakes. We have our waste stored kilometers underground. There are elevators that go down. It is really the future of
Yeah.
nuclear technology. The problem is in France, it's a very old system. They're not as precise, they're not as safe, and certainly the disposal isn't
Yeah.
as efficient. But looking at the immediate, needs of bringing down our fossil fuel emissions, I do think that it remains a very important bridge technology until that time.
Yeah. And what's your understanding, by the way? Because I've heard cross information about this, about what's the status of nuclear, especially advanced nuclear, under this administration. Are they
Well,
friendly to it
that's
like
the
previous
one,
republic? It's the one thing that they've kept.
that is the one thing that they have kept.
Yeah. Well, there's a silver lining in every cloud, I
And if
guess.
you had gone at the COPs, they had delegations of bipartisan representation from the
Yeah.
USA, and
Yeah.
there were a lot of presentations on from US representatives on this nuclear option,
Yeah.
which were also
This is
addressed, at the COPs as an understanding, a unified understanding that this is an important bridge technology
yeah. Yeah.
for the time being.
Yeah. And if I were giving advice to the energy dominance guys, I say, you want to lean into your strengths? Okay. Nuclear engineering is your strength. Maybe geothermal
Okay,
is your
Chris
strength.
is getting
Stop
his
tying
boxing
yourself.
gloves on now. Hi, Chris, you're
To the
showing your
dying
face. Do you
technologies.
want to engage in this discussion?
I just wanted to add, I mean, I think, I'm a geologist and I worked on groundwater projects, and we utilized the modeling that was done at Columbia River Hanford Reservation. And Rockwell International did a study because at that time, at the end of the 1980s, the United States was looking for a repository site.
Yeah.
So they're saying, okay, let's use the Columbia River basalt flows, which are massive. But when they started doing drilling and they started looking at the stuff that was buried in there from the 1940s when they were working on developing the atom bomb, all the stuff that was buried was gone, drained into the groundwater system, which eventually went into the Columbia River. What they found at like 3,000 meters of doing drilling is that between these lava flows, you have massive amounts of water moving through there. So it was canned. You can't use the Columbia River basalts as an end repository site. And so for me, it's like you're looking at the development of nuclear energy. It's all been about the development, but there's never been any response to end repository sites, except, for example, like Dana was saying, in Finland, Sweden has an underground laboratory. The Swiss have a laboratory in the Alps, but the problem is you have to look for suitable sites, and not every country has a suitable geology to deposit these massive amounts of radioactive waste. Germany has, for example, where I live, has a problem now with one of its end repository sites called Asse, which was in a salt dome, which is now being flooded with groundwater. It's a huge problem, and the engineers are like thinking of how can we get this stuff out of there before it contaminates the regional groundwater system. So I feel like, I mean, the argument that nuclear energy is a bridge is to some extent okay, but it always neglects the end repository site. What do we do with all this waste? And a lot of the waste is still being stored at nuclear power plant sites. So I'm just like, I mean, there's nuclear fusion, but that's still like some kind of pipe dream. So
I'd personally be interested to know more about your experience, not here because it's dinner time for me, but maybe in a future one about your experience, like working on and studying, waste repository.
Yeah,
So you
we'd
seem
love to hear more
have a
about
lot of
it.
experience.
Well,
Great to have you.
I'm a person of I came of age in environmental activism in the 1980s. When a book was pushed into my hand from a colleague that I was working with at League of Conservation Voters by Hazel Henderson, called The Politics of the Solar Age. That book was, I think, was written in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, I mean, it's taken us so long to get to this point where now we're finally utilizing solar energy, whereas the
Yeah.
technology has actually been relatively
Yeah.
advanced. I mean,
Since the 70s, I remember,
Yeah.
that's
It's
you're dating me
man.
too.
What was the big one? I have it as a book, the big thing that was done in the Times about how, with all the characters and how basically the oil industry uh killed that in the 80s everyone agreed we should do something about global warming.
no.
And we had nuclear power and we had solar technology, and it was left to die and it wasn't developed
Of course,
for decades to preserve their own
like
business.
the
And
tobacco
I keep
industry.
this as the front paper on my desk, which is, I don't know, can people see me?
Yeah.
This is the assessing ExxonMobil's global warming projections. It
Oh,
was,
yeah.
yeah, this is a paper that was in Science a few years ago. And it's basically all of the climate models, that
They
the
had, they
Exxon
do.
Corporation ran, and like dozens of models from them, from academic institutes they'd contracted, um, just showing exactly what we're seeing now. Like the real observed temperature runs right down the middle of the scatter of their climate models. Like it's shocking
It's
how
shocking.
accurate in the aggregate these fairly simple models were at predicting the trend
And
that we
um,
saw. And they made a whole political identity, which now controls the government, over, well, we're not 100% sure, so we'd better not do anything.
yeah, listen, this is too true, too sad, and what we're
Yeah,
facing on every side um, would be enough to send us all, running.
yeah.
But we are at past an hour and a
We're
half,
past time.
and it has been a great pleasure to have you, Harry, for a fascinating presentation that I'm sure we all have copious questions we would still like to engage with. Stay involved with the ECCC, join
I'm here.
next climate cafes, make your tiny action in opposing the executive order to eliminate vote by
Yeah.
mail, as I posted at the beginning of this chat, and try not to lose hope. We are more powerful together. So
Here,
thank you
here.
for joining us, and have a nice morning, evening, um, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Harry. Thank
Thank you,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
See you next time, folks. Bye.
Bye.